Have you ever stood in the middle of a Southeast Asian city and felt like you somehow ended up in Los Angeles? That's exactly how Oliver James felt. He's a 52-year-old urban designer from Atlanta, Georgia. While taking a photo of the sky with his phone, trying to capture the mix of buildings and light, he suddenly realized something strange. This place didn't look like the Manila he expected. He saw tall glass buildings that seemed to touch the sky, glowing art displays at night, coffee shops with robots delivering drinks, clean roads, electric cars, and solar-powered transport stations. But just a few blocks away, there were tricycles and a mother praying with a rosary beside a small roadside shop. "Wait, this is Manila," Oliver whispered. "I thought I came to the Philippines, not the future." It was his first day in Bonifacio Global City, BGC, as locals call it. But he didn't know then that this visit would change the way he thought about Southeast Asia and about progress itself. Oliver wasn't just a tourist taking pictures of street food. He came looking for design ideas and left with something deeper, not just amazed by the buildings, but touched by the spirit behind them. At first, he was quietly overwhelmed. Manila, he had assumed, was messy and behind the times. At least, that's what he'd read online and heard at work. Poor but happy, people said. Rustic and raw. But this part of the city felt like a secret. He walked alone for nearly 2 hours, amazed by what he saw: fast internet, 5G everywhere, drones delivering packages, modern buildings with AI services. It was more high-tech than Miami. Yet, it still felt Filipino. There were colorful electric jeepneys, street vendors using QR codes, teens speaking fluent English while enjoying Hello Hello and working on laptops. Manila wasn't trying to impress outsiders. It was building something for its own people. At lunch, Oliver met Miguel, a young architect from Quezon City. He was sharp and thoughtful. Miguel asked, "Do you think we look like America?" Oliver laughed. "I don't know. It feels like a cleaner version of California." Miguel smiled and said, "That's the problem. We were never trying to be America." Those words hit Oliver hard. He realized he came with unconscious bias. Like many Western designers, he had assumed Southeast Asia copied the West. But what if he was wrong? What if Manila wasn't copying, it was creating its own path? Miguel explained, "Our goal isn't power. It's dignity. We want technology to help us stay Filipino, not lose who we are." Oliver didn't say anything. But deep down, he understood. In the West, the future often feels cold and distant. But here, the future smelled like home-cooked food. It sounded like laughter. It included both jeepneys and LED signs, without pretending to be anything else. That night, sitting on a rooftop looking over the city, something changed in Oliver. He thought about how many people like him had missed this side of the story. How easy it was to believe that there's only one version of progress. But now, he knew better. Oliver thought Manila would remind him of New York. Instead, it felt like a glimpse of the future. But this future wasn't just about tall buildings and new tech, it was about pride. It was about a city and a country growing in a modern way while still staying true to who they are. And that was only his first day. The next morning, Oliver saw something that surprised him even more. It wasn't about buildings or gadgets. It was about the Filipino people themselves. Something happened that morning that he would never forget, not because the city looked modern, but because the people felt even more advanced in their spirit. The day started quietly. There were no flashy lights or noise. Just the sound of trees gently swaying as he walked barefoot down the clean tiles of High Street at Sunrise. He hadn't planned to wake up early, but something inside him wouldn't let him sleep. Maybe it was how the city had stirred something in him. Maybe it was the beginning of a new kind of humility. He stopped in front of a small cafe, not because of the coffee, but because of the music. A classic Kundiman song played through old speakers, sounding perfect. A young man in a hoodie was placing plants by the window and softly humming along. "You know this song?" Oliver asked. The boy nodded. "My grandfather sang it every morning." There was something powerful in the boy's voice, light but heavy with memory and pride. Later that day, Oliver joined a walking tour of Intramuros, the old part of Manila. He wanted to see something different from the glass towers of BGC. But he didn't expect to meet Rosario. She was in her late 60s wearing a simple blouse and jeans, holding an umbrella to block the sun. She was a volunteer guide who told the history of the walled city every day except Sundays for free. "Why do you do this?" Oliver asked. Rosario smiled. "Because if we don't tell our own story, someone else will." She took him through ruins older than the United States. Through churches that had been rebuilt from war. Through courtyards where people once whispered prayers during the Japanese occupation. But it wasn't just the history that moved Oliver, it was how Rosario told it. She spoke as if each stone had a name, as if even broken walls had dignity. "People think being modern means forgetting the past," she said as they walked past a worn Spanish gate. "But true strength comes from knowing where you come from and building on top of that." Oliver thought of the cities he had helped design back in the US, clean, efficient, well-planned but lonely. No one shared stories in parks or building lobbies in Atlanta. No one played old songs near shiny buildings. No one gave their time to protect history simply because it mattered. He looked around Intramuros and realized something important. Manila wasn't hiding its past. It was honoring it. It was building a new city, but always holding on to something sacred. At lunch, he sat under the shade of an old tree and watched kids laughing and playing with bubble guns. A vendor handed him a cold coconut drink. When he tried to pay, she smiled and said, "Just drink, sir. It's hot today." That small act hit him hard. No act. No system. Just real kindness. In that moment, something shifted inside him. Because even with all the technology, AI taxis, and LED signs, the soul of the city couldn't be digitized. The Filipino spirit was still there, warm, giving, full of memory, dancing between joy and sorrow like it was the most natural thing in the world. That afternoon, he met up with Miguel again. They were supposed to visit a new eco-friendly building in Pasig. But before they left, Oliver turned to him and asked, "Why does it feel like I've been lied to my whole life about the Philippines?" Miguel didn't hesitate. Because the world only pays attention when we're suffering. Typhoons. Corruption. Poverty. No one talks about us when we're thriving. That's not the story they expect. Oliver nodded slowly. He knew exactly what Miguel meant. He had sat in meetings where people made decisions about developing countries without much care. He had heard colleagues say, "They're not ready," like readiness could only be measured by money or GDP. Even if he didn't say those words himself, he had once believed them too. But here, In this bright and living city, Oliver was seeing something no report or news story had ever shown him. Manila wasn't looking for approval. It was already becoming something new, something no one had predicted. That evening, Oliver and Miguel visited a sustainable village project. It was built by engineers and local barangay leaders using bamboo, solar panels, and native design elements like capes windows and traditional weaving. It didn't look like the sleek buildings of BGC. It felt softer, warmer, designed for people, not just for photos. There, Oliver met Teresa, a young engineer from the University of the Philippines. She was smart, passionate, and deeply spiritual. She proudly showed him a solar energy system made for low-income families. "We want to prove," she said, "that even the poorest Filipino deserves to live in beauty." Those words stopped Oliver in his tracks. Not just dignity, but beauty. They weren't just building to survive, they were building with grace. By the end of that day, Oliver couldn't stop thinking about it. Beauty over efficiency. Grace over profit. Faith alongside science. He had come to Manila expecting flashy buildings and modern tech. But what he found was something deeper, a country rethinking what progress really means, not by ignoring its people, but by putting them at the center. 3 days into his trip, Oliver took a quiet walk through a narrow street in Pateros. The shiny towers of BGC now felt far away, almost like a dream. Here, the houses were small and worn, but every window glowed with warmth. Roosters crowed. Kids ran barefoot down the road. The smell of sinigang drifted from a kitchen. This was the Manila people usually talked about, simple, humble. But even here, the future had arrived, quietly, respectfully. There were solar panels on rooftops. Free Wi-Fi powered by local microgrids. A barangay center run by mothers and retired engineers. That's when Oliver realized the future wasn't just in the skyscrapers. It was right here, in the quiet spaces, in the small acts of rebuilding, in the corners no one writes about. He wasn't there for design work that day. He had been invited, last minute, to a town fiesta. At first, he almost said no. He didn't want to be a tourist in someone else's celebration. But Teresa insisted. "You can't understand Manila," she said, "until you've danced in its heart." So he went, unsure of what to expect. When he arrived, the streets were alive with color. Banners waved from every post. Kids dressed as angels practiced lines for a play. Grandmothers balanced trays of kakanin on their heads. Teenagers rehearsed dance steps on a basketball court, half shy, half proud. At the center stood a small altar, decorated with flowers, candles, and a smiling Santo Nano statue. Worn by time, but full of joy. Oliver stood quietly, taking it all in. He saw neighbors hug each other like family. Old men singing Harna under trees. Laughter echoing from windows. Nobody cared about his accent or his camera. Someone handed him a plate of pancit. Another slipped a tiny flag into his pocket. And then, it started to rain. Not a storm. Just that soft, moody Manila rain that makes the streets shine like mirrors. Oliver thought people would run for cover. But something magical happened. They danced. Right there, in the rain. Under the grey sky. Barefoot and laughing. There was no stage. No plan. Just people moving together, like they knew something the rest of the world didn't. Oliver watched, speechless. His eyes began to sting. What he saw wasn't fancy or flashy, it was honest and real. In that moment, he realized something that years of books and conferences had never taught him. This was modernity too. Not the kind you measure with skyscrapers or GDP, but the kind built on joy, strength, and community. That night, after the rain had turned into a soft mist and the dancing had ended, someone invited him into their small home. The family didn't speak much English, but they offered him a towel, a chair, and a warm bowl of arroz caldo. They didn't ask him questions. They didn't try to impress him. They simply let him be. And in that quiet, Oliver felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. He looked around the room and saw a small altar in the corner, Mary, Joseph, the Santo Nano, and a flickering candle. It wasn't loud or showy. It was the kind of quiet faith that holds entire families together. That's when it finally clicked what made Manila different. It wasn't just the technology or the energy. It wasn't just the warmth of the people. It was something deeper. Something invisible that connected everything. Faith. Not just religious faith, though that was everywhere, but faith in each other. Faith that even if the world ignored them, they wouldn't forget who they were. Faith that beauty was worth creating, that kindness was worth keeping, that no matter how modern they became, they would never abandon their roots. Oliver left that house changed, not because he saw something huge or dramatic, but because he saw something true. On the ride back to his hotel, soaking wet and tired, he looked out the window and whispered to himself, "This is not America." Then he smiled. This is something better. This final day in Manila came quietly. No grand goodbye, no scheduled tour. Just Oliver sitting at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, his suitcase beside him and a thick notebook on his lap. He had been writing since dawn. Sketches, notes, thoughts, pieces of conversations. But mostly questions. There was something about Manila, something about the Philippines, that had reached deeper than his education, deeper than his career. It touched a part of him that he thought he had lost. Something soft. Something Western life had nearly squeezed out of him. So, he thought about everything he had experienced. The ultra-modern skyline. The bamboo village in Pasig. The town fiesta in the rain. Rosario's stories in Intramuros. Miguel's quiet pride. Teresa's belief that the poor deserve beauty too. He remembered the grandmother who gave him a handkerchief when he cried at Mass. The street vendor who refused payment and said, "God will provide." Each memory, messy and beautiful, came together like stained glass, unclear up close, but shining when you looked at the whole picture. He looked down at his boarding pass. His next stop was Singapore, then back to Atlanta. But something in him had shifted. He wasn't ready to leave, not in spirit. He pulled out his phone and opened an email draft. It was for his company, the design firm he had co-founded, the one he had dedicated 20 years to. A company known for luxury buildings and big clients who cared more about numbers than people. He hesitated for a moment. Then he hit send. In the email, he said he was taking an indefinite leave, not because he was tired, but because he had seen something in the Philippines that he couldn't forget. A different kind of future. One not obsessed with profit or perfection, but rooted in people and purpose. He had come to Manila for a project. But what he found was meaning. And that meaning wasn't in the skyscrapers of BGC or even in the solar-powered village. It was in how a community welcomed a stranger, in how technology supported tradition instead of replacing it, in how faith wasn't hidden but worn with pride. As his flight was called, Oliver didn't move right away. He looked around the airport lounge. Dozens of Filipinos waiting to board flights, overseas workers, students, families. And yet, each one seemed to carry something invisible. Like they were ambassadors of something the world hadn't fully noticed yet. That's when Oliver understood what he had failed to see before. Modern life doesn't mean poverty disappears. It means dignity remains. That's what Oliver saw in the Philippines. A country stepping into the future while still holding on to its values, always reaching back to help one another. He stood up slowly, not because his flight was boarding, but because something inside him was ready to begin again. As he walked toward the gate, he quietly said the words he'd been carrying with him all week. "This isn't America." Then he smiled, eyes misty. "This is the Philippines." And for the first time in a very long time, Oliver didn't just feel inspired, he felt at home. If this story moved you, like it moved Oliver, don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone who still thinks they know what the Philippines is, because maybe they've only seen half the picture. And if you believe, like we do, that progress doesn't mean losing who we are, then tap the like button, subscribe, and come with us on this journey. Let's rediscover the heart of the Filipino spirit. There's more to see, more to feel, and so much more to be proud of. This isn't just a channel, this is home.